There was a time when a farmer could sell a wagon full of wheat in the morning, buy a pair of boots in the afternoon, and pay his taxes a week later, all without ever touching a single piece of paper money issued by the American government. It sounds almost impossible today when colorful banknotes and digital payments seem as natural as breathing. Yet for the first generations of the United States, the idea of carrying government paper currency was unfamiliar. The nation existed, its people traded, its cities expanded, and its frontiers stretched farther west year after year. But the money in their pockets told a far stranger story than most people realize. Welcome back. If slow journeys through the forgotten corners of history help you unwind at the end of the day, consider supporting the channel by liking the video and subscribing. And if you happen to be listening from somewhere around the world tonight, I'd love to know where you are and what time it is there. There is something quietly comforting about imagining so many people separated by oceans and time zones settling into the same story together. Now find a comfortable place to rest. Let the noise of the day drift a little farther away. Tonight, we travel back to an America that had no national paper money, where silver coins, Spanish dollars, handwritten notes, and trust itself kept the economy alive. To understand how such a system could exist, we first have to leave behind our modern assumptions about money. Today, money feels solid. A government prints it, banks protect it, and nearly everyone accepts it without hesitation. But for most of human history, money was far less certain. It was metal dug from the earth, weighed by hand, clipped by dishonest traders, carried across dangerous roads, and judged by the reputation of whoever issued it. The young United States inherited this older world. When the American colonies declared independence from Britain in 1776, they also inherited confusion. Different colonies had long used different currencies. British pounds existed mostly as accounting units. Spanish silver dollars arrived through Caribbean trade. French coins circulated in some places. Dutch coins appeared in busy ports. Local merchants accepted whatever they trusted. Even before independence, colonial governments had experimented with paper currency. Some issues worked reasonably well for a time. Others lost value rapidly. During the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress printed enormous quantities of paper notes to finance the struggle against Britain. These became known simply as Continentals. At first, people accepted them with cautious optimism. The war demanded sacrifice, and paper money seemed easier to produce than precious metals. But wars are expensive, and governments under pressure often print more money than their economies can support. That is exactly what happened. As more and more Continentals entered circulation, confidence slowly faded. Prices climbed. Merchants hesitated. Counterfeit notes spread throughout the colonies, some reportedly encouraged by British efforts to weaken the revolutionary cause. Before long, the once hopeful currency had become nearly worthless. The phrase "not worth a continent" entered everyday speech. That mattered far beyond simple economics. The memory of worthless paper money settled deeply into the minds of America's founders. Men like George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and many others disagreed on numerous political questions, but they shared painful memories of inflation during the Revolution. When delegates gathered to write the Constitution in 1787, those memories shaped their decisions. The Constitution granted Congress the power to coin money. Notice the wording carefully. It spoke clearly about coins. It said nothing about creating a permanent national paper currency for ordinary circulation. Instead, the Constitution prohibited individual states from issuing bills of credit and required states to recognize only gold and silver coin as legal tender for paying debts. This reflected more than legal language. It reflected distrust. The founders feared that easy paper money tempted governments toward irresponsible spending. Hard money, gold and silver, seemed more disciplined because it required real resources to produce. Yet even this apparently simple solution contained complications. Gold and silver coins were never abundant enough for every daily transaction. America was growing rapidly. New towns appeared across forests and river valleys. Farmers produced crops hundreds of miles from coastal ports. Merchants extended credit across enormous distances. Actual coins often remained frustratingly scarce. Imagine walking through Philadelphia around the year 1800. Horse carts rattle over uneven streets. Blacksmiths strike glowing iron beneath open workshops. Sailors unload barrels of sugar, coffee, tobacco, and rum from ships arriving from distant ports. Shopkeepers carefully record purchases inside thick leather account books. Many customers buy goods without paying immediately. Instead, they receive credit. Credit was one of the invisible foundations of early American life. Neighbors knew each other. Merchants knew their regular customers. Farmers settled accounts after harvest. Craftsmen expected payment when work finished. Money existed, but trust often moved faster. This surprises many people today because we imagine economies depending entirely on physical cash. In reality, early Americans relied heavily upon personal reputation. A respected farmer could purchase seed on promise alone. A dishonest merchant soon discovered that no coin could easily repair a damaged reputation. But that was only part of the story. Actual coins continued circulating alongside these personal arrangements. Many were not even American. The most famous coin in early America was the Spanish silver dollar, also called the Piece of Eight. Minted throughout Spain's vast empire, using silver mined largely in Mexico and South America, these coins became one of the world's first truly global currencies. They traveled aboard Spanish ships across oceans, passed through Caribbean ports, entered colonial markets, crossed frontier settlements, and eventually filled countless American pockets. People trusted them because they contained reliable amounts of silver. Their value rested inside the metal itself. When the United States established its own mint in 1792, producing American coins took time. Buildings had to be constructed, machinery installed, skilled workers hired, precious metals obtained. Even after production began, American coins remained relatively uncommon for years. Foreign coins continued doing much of the nation's work. It seems strange now that an independent America depended so heavily upon money minted by another empire. Yet economics often ignores political pride. People accepted whatever reliably held value. Silver had no nationality once it entered a marketplace. Meanwhile, another institution quietly transformed American finance. Banks. Not central banks in the modern sense, but individual commercial banks scattered across growing towns and cities. When someone deposited gold or silver into one of these banks, the bank often issued paper notes promising payment on demand. These banknotes looked remarkably similar to modern currency. They carried beautiful engravings, signatures, elaborate designs, and printed values. But they were fundamentally different. Each represented a promise made by a specific bank. A $10 note from one bank might be accepted eagerly in its hometown, while viewed suspiciously hundreds of miles away. Everything depended upon trust. Was the issuing bank financially healthy? Did it actually possess enough gold and silver? Would it still exist next month? Those questions mattered every time someone accepted a note. As America expanded westward, thousands of different banknotes entered circulation. No single national design unified them. Travelers often carried small guidebooks listing the reliability of various banks. These publications estimated whether notes traded at full value or should be discounted because the issuing institution seemed financially weak. Imagine stopping at an inn after weeks on horseback. You hand the innkeeper several banknotes. He studies them carefully. Perhaps he recognizes one immediately. Another requires consultation with his guidebook. A third comes from a distant bank nobody has heard from in months. Its value suddenly becomes uncertain. Money itself had become a matter of investigation. And beneath this complicated system lay an even deeper reality. America frequently experienced shortages of cash. Coins disappeared from circulation during financial crises as frightened people hoarded precious metals. Bank failures destroyed confidence. Economic panics swept through communities with remarkable speed. One famous example arrived in 1819. Known as the Panic of 1819, it became America's first major peacetime financial crisis. Banks had expanded credit aggressively following the War of 1812. Land speculation flourished. Optimism filled newspapers and conversations alike. Then confidence broke. Banks demanded repayment. Loans dried up. Businesses collapsed. Farmers lost property. Families faced uncertainty they had never imagined. Paper banknotes that once seemed dependable suddenly became questionable. Ordinary Americans learned a painful lesson. Money was not simply paper or metal. It was confidence. And confidence could disappear almost overnight. To understand everyday life during these years, we should leave government buildings and banking halls for a moment. Instead, Imagine an ordinary family living on the American frontier around the 1830s. Their cabin stands beside rough farmland carved from forest. The father raises corn. The mother spins cloth. Children help gather firewood before winter. A nearby neighbor repairs wagons. Another raises cattle. Few people possess large amounts of cash. Instead, goods and labor move through networks of exchange. A sack of grain might pay for blacksmith work. Fresh meat could settle part of a medical bill. A day's labor repairing fences might reduce an existing debt. Historians sometimes call this barter, but that word can oversimplify reality. Most exchanges involved ongoing relationships rather than isolated trades. Communities remembered favors. Debts accumulated gradually. Accounts balanced over months or even years. Life depended less upon instant payment than upon lasting trust. Meanwhile, cities developed different rhythms. In New York, Boston, Baltimore, and New Orleans, international trade required larger financial systems. Merchants imported tea from China, textiles from Britain, sugar from the Caribbean, and manufactured goods from Europe. Large commercial transactions relied upon bills of exchange. These documents functioned almost like sophisticated promises to pay. Rather than transporting heavy chests filled with silver across dangerous roads or stormy seas, merchants transferred financial obligations through carefully written papers recognized by banks and trading houses. Commerce became increasingly abstract. Yet ordinary workers still often preferred coins whenever possible. There was comfort in holding something undeniably valuable. Silver felt reassuring. Gold even more so. Paper depended upon belief. Metal depended upon weight. And then came another challenge. Counterfeiting. Because hundreds of private banks printed their own notes, criminals found countless opportunities. Some forged entire banknotes. Others altered denominations. Still others established fraudulent banks that existed only long enough to issue worthless notes before disappearing. These became known as wildcat banks. Stories later claimed they were located so remotely that only wildcats could reach them. The exact origin of the name remains debated, but the image captured public frustration perfectly. People struggled to know which money deserved trust. Merchants inspected notes beneath candlelight. Bank clerks compared signatures. Newspapers published warnings. Entire businesses emerged simply to identify genuine currency. Money required constant vigilance. Yet despite these difficulties, America's economy continued expanding. Canals connected distant regions. Steamboats transformed river travel. Railroads gradually stitched together growing states. Factories multiplied. Immigration increased. The population surged. Somehow, amid all this complexity, commerce continued functioning. Human adaptability deserves much of the credit. People adjusted. Communities developed habits. Businesses learned caution. Banks established reputations. Experience replaced certainty. Still, problems accumulated beneath the surface. The decision seemed manageable for many years. History would remember it differently. By the 1850s, the United States had become wealthier, larger, and more interconnected than ever before. Yet its monetary system remained astonishingly fragmented. Thousands of different banknotes circulated simultaneously. Some were beautifully printed. Others appeared crude. Some represented stable institutions. Others rested upon fragile foundations. Travelers crossing several states might discover that perfectly acceptable money at breakfast became heavily discounted by supper. Such confusion slowed commerce. It complicated investment. It increased risk. Most importantly, it revealed that America possessed an expanding national economy without truly national money. And then history delivered a crisis unlike anything the country had previously faced. Civil War. When Southern states seceded in 1861, the United States confronted enormous financial demands. Armies had to be raised, weapons purchased, uniforms sewn, railroads operated, food supplied, soldiers paid. Wars consume resources with relentless speed. Tax revenue alone proved insufficient. Borrowing helped, but borrowing also had limits. Gold reserves dwindled. The federal government faced a difficult choice. Continue relying entirely upon scarce precious metals and fragmented private banking, or create something unprecedented. In 1862, Congress passed the Legal Tender Act. For the first time, the United States issued national paper money intended for widespread circulation. These famous notes became known as greenbacks because of the distinctive green ink used on their backs. The decision marked a turning point in American financial history. It was controversial immediately. Supporters argued that extraordinary times demanded extraordinary measures. Critics feared repeating the inflation that had haunted the Revolutionary era. Both concerns contained truth. Greenbacks did lose value against gold during parts of the war. Inflation affected prices. Debates filled newspapers and legislative halls. Yet unlike the chaotic mixture of thousands of unrelated banknotes, greenbacks represented the authority of the national government itself. That difference mattered enormously. For ordinary soldiers receiving wages, merchants selling supplies, and families struggling through wartime uncertainty, national paper currency offered increasing consistency. The old world had begun to change. But history rarely changes overnight. Private banknotes continued circulating for some time. Coins remained important. Gold retained prestige. Silver continued passing from hand to hand. Old habits survived alongside new institutions. Gradually, however, the balance shifted. National paper money became familiar. Children grew up recognizing federal designs rather than hundreds of local ones. Businesses simplified accounting. Interstate trade became easier. Financial identity slowly became national rather than merely local. Yet the story leaves us with an intriguing question. If America functioned for decades without national paper money, what truly held its economy together? The answer is both simple and surprisingly profound. Trust. Trust in silver. Trust in gold. Trust in neighbors. Trust in merchants. Trust in banks. Trust in signatures. Trust in reputations carefully built over years. Every coin represented confidence in metal. Every banknote represented confidence in an institution. Every credit agreement represented confidence in another human being. Money has always been about belief as much as substance. Even today, when numbers move invisibly between computers and fractions of a second, we still rely upon confidence. The technology has changed. The principle has not. Looking back across those early decades of American history, it becomes easier to appreciate how uncertain everyday economic life once felt. Imagine counting unfamiliar coins by candlelight. Imagine wondering whether a distant bank still existed. Imagine traveling hundreds of miles carrying notes whose value changed with every town. Imagine trusting your neighbor because no written contract could fully replace personal honor. That world now feels distant, yet it shaped the nation that followed. The America of Washington, Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, farmers, shopkeepers, sailors, immigrants, enslaved people seeking freedom, craftsmen, and frontier families all lived within this remarkable financial landscape. Their money told stories about politics, fear, ambition, geography, and human relationships. It reminds us that economies are never built upon currency alone. They are built upon people choosing day after day to believe that tomorrow someone else will accept the same promise they accepted today. The greenbacks of 1862 did not simply introduce new paper. They represented a new understanding of what the United States itself could become. A single nation required a more unified financial language. That transformation would continue through later banking reforms, the creation of the Federal Reserve decades afterward, and eventually the modern dollar familiar around the world. But the roots of that story stretch back into dusty markets where Spanish silver changed hands, quiet frontier stores where purchases rested upon handwritten ledgers, bustling ports where merchants exchanged promises instead of coins, and modest homes where families measured wealth not only by cash, but by trust earned within their communities. History often remembers wars, presidents, and great speeches. Yet sometimes the quieter stories reveal just as much. The story of how ordinary Americans paid for bread, bought land, settled debts, and built businesses without national paper money reminds us that civilizations depend upon countless invisible agreements between strangers. Those agreements are fragile. They must be earned. They can be lost. And when preserved, they become powerful enough to support an entire nation. If you are still awake, perhaps the next time you hold a banknote or simply glance at the balance on a screen, you might remember that there was once an America where none of that existed. Instead, there were silver dollars worn smooth by countless hands, banknotes carrying the names of distant towns, account books filled with careful handwriting, and communities held together by promises people expected one another to keep. For tonight, they'll let those old roads grow quiet again. Let the clatter of horses fade into the distance, let the candlelight dim inside the little shops and counting houses, and let the busy market settle into silence. History will always have another forgotten corner waiting for us. But until then, may the night remain peaceful, and may you rest well. There was a time when an American could walk into a busy market, pay for a meal with a Spanish coin, receive change in a French one, and never think twice about it. The shopkeeper would nod, the merchant beside him would continue weighing sacks of flour, and the blacksmith across the street would accept the very same coins before sunset. It sounds impossible today. How could a young nation that had fought so hard for its independence rely on the money of foreign empires? Yet for nearly 70 years after the birth of the United States, this was simply how everyday life worked. It was one of the quiet contradictions at the heart of early America. The country had declared itself free from Britain. It had written a constitution. It had elected presidents, built new cities, and watched its borders slowly push farther west. But when ordinary people reached into their pockets, the coins they touched often carried the faces of Spanish kings, Mexican eagles, French rulers, or British monarchs rather than American symbols. Welcome back. If you enjoy these slow walks through the forgotten corners of history, I'm glad you're here. If these stories help make your evenings a little quieter, consider subscribing and joining us on more journeys into the past. And if you'd like, leave a comment with your city and the local time where you're listening tonight. It is always comforting to imagine people from different places settling into the same story beneath the same night sky. Now get comfortable. Let your shoulders relax. Let the room become a little quieter. Tonight, we are traveling back to the first decades of the United States to discover why Americans trusted foreign coins more than their own and how that unusual reality helped shape the nation itself. To understand this story, we must begin long before the United States existed, long before George Washington became president, long before the Declaration of Independence was signed. We need to step into the bustling ports of the Atlantic world where ships carried not only spices, sugar, and silk, but also the lifeblood of every economy, money. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the American colonies were part of the British Empire. On paper, they used British pounds, shillings, and pence. But there was one very important problem. Britain did not send enough coins across the Atlantic. This was not an accident. British leaders believed that precious metals such as gold and silver should remain in the mother country whenever possible. Colonies were expected to send valuable goods back to Britain, not drain its supply of hard currency. For ordinary colonists, this created an everyday struggle. Imagine a farmer bringing wheat into town to sell, a carpenter finishing work on a new barn, a merchant unloading barrels of molasses from a Caribbean ship. They all needed money to buy supplies, pay workers, and settle debts. Yet actual British coins were surprisingly rare. When coins are scarce, people become creative. Sometimes they traded goods directly. Tobacco became money in parts of Virginia. In New England, dried fish and grain occasionally helped settle accounts. Beaver pelts, prized in Europe for making fashionable hats, served as valuable trade items in northern colonies. But barter could only go so far. A blacksmith might need bread today, but receive timber instead. A merchant might want silver, not sacks of corn. People needed something widely trusted, something everyone recognized. That solution arrived from an unexpected direction. To the south lay the vast Spanish Empire. Spain controlled enormous territories across Central and South America, including some of the richest silver mines the world had ever seen. Deep beneath the mountains of present-day Mexico and Bolivia, miners extracted astonishing quantities of precious silver. Year after year, fleets of Spanish ships carried that silver across oceans. Much of it was minted into coins known as Spanish dollars or pieces of 8. These coins would quietly become one of the world's first truly international currencies. They appeared in Europe. They reached Asia. They circulated throughout Africa. And they filled markets across North America. The Spanish dollar earned its reputation through consistency. People trusted its weight. They trusted its silver content. Unlike many other coins, it was known almost everywhere. For merchants, trust mattered more than nationality. A silver coin did not care which flag flew above a harbor. If it contained reliable, precious metal, people accepted it. Soon, Spanish dollars became common throughout Britain's American colonies. Even British merchants often accepted them without hesitation. The irony was difficult to miss. Colonists officially belonged to Britain, but much of their daily business depended upon Spanish money. Yet this arrangement solved real problems. Farmers could sell crops. Shopkeepers could make change. Sailors could receive wages. International trade became easier because everyone already recognized the same coins. Without realizing it, ordinary Americans were becoming participants in a global economy long before their own nation existed. But beneath this practical solution lay growing political tensions. As Britain's relationship with its colonies worsened during the 1760s and 1770s, taxes, protests, and arguments filled newspapers and taverns alike. The famous disputes over the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, and other policies slowly pushed the colonies toward revolution. Money played an important role in these tensions. Many colonists believed Britain's economic policies favored London while leaving America short of the currency needed for local trade. Financial frustration became one more reason why resentment spread. Then came the revolution. War changes almost everything. Armies need food, weapons, uniforms, horses, wagons, and ammunition. Governments suddenly spend far more than they collect in taxes. The Continental Congress faced an impossible challenge. It had declared independence from one of the most powerful empires on earth, but it possessed no strong taxation system and very little gold or silver. So it turned to paper money. The Continental Congress began printing notes to finance the war effort. At first, many Americans accepted them. Supporting the currency became a patriotic act. But printing presses worked faster than confidence. As more and more paper notes entered circulation, their value slowly fell. Counterfeiters added to the problem. British officials were even accused of encouraging fake Continental notes to weaken the revolutionary cause. Whether buying bread in Philadelphia or supplies for soldiers near the front, people discovered that yesterday's money no longer bought the same amount today. Prices climbed. Merchants hesitated. Confidence faded. Eventually, the continental currency became nearly worthless. The phrase "not worth a continental N" entered everyday language as a warning against trusting paper promises too easily. That painful memory would shape America's future for generations. The men who eventually wrote the Constitution had lived through this experience. They remembered watching savings disappear and prices rise. They understood what happened when people stopped believing in money. Because of that memory, many of the nation's founders developed a deep respect for gold and silver coins. Metal felt honest. Paper felt uncertain. When delegates met in Philadelphia in 1787 to write the Constitution, these lessons remained fresh in their minds. The new government received the power to coin money, but many leaders remained cautious about creating another large system of national paper currency. They wanted stability. They wanted trust. Most of all, they wanted to avoid repeating the financial chaos of the Revolution. But there was one enormous problem. The United States had won its independence. It had not won a fully functioning monetary system. The country now stretched from the Atlantic coast toward the Appalachian Mountains. New towns continued to grow. Farmers harvested crops. Merchants imported goods from Europe and the Caribbean. Ships sailed in and out of busy harbors every day. Commerce expanded faster than American coin production ever could. The United States simply did not have enough minting facilities, enough precious metal, or enough time to replace all the foreign coins already circulating through the economy. And so, almost quietly, the new nation continued relying on the same foreign money that had filled colonial markets for decades. The American flag had changed. The government had changed. The Constitution had changed. But inside the pockets of ordinary people, very little looked different. The story of America's foreign coins was only beginning, and what happened next would reveal just how deeply connected the young republic remained to the wider world.